What if the most powerful truth ever offered to humanity was never lost, but was deliberately hidden from those who were never meant to find it? Imagine a garden shrouded in the suffocating darkness of a world on the edge of change. The air is thick with the scent of ancient olive trees and the weight of a decision that will echo through millennia. We have been shown the image of a man on his knees, his face turned to the heavens in anguish, surrendering to a fate he cannot escape. This is the story we were given. It is a story of sacrifice, of sorrow, of a noble and tragic end that promises a beginning for others. But it is an incomplete story, a single frame taken from a much larger, more profound cinematic truth. For in that same dust, under that same moonless sky, something else was happening. An act not of submission, but of supreme spiritual rebellion. Look closer, past the veil of accepted history. See the hand that does not tremble, but moves with intention, tracing patterns. In the soft earth, this is the heart of the mystery, the detail erased from the final telling. We were taught to focus on the prayer of a son to a father, a plea for the cup to pass. But what if the true ritual was not in the words spoken to the sky, but in the symbols drawn upon the ground? What if, in his darkest hour, the master was not begging for an escape, but was instead leaving behind a map for ours? A key etched in the dirt, so simple it could be remembered by a glance, yet so powerful it could dismantle the very prison built around our consciousness. Why has this act of quiet defiance, this moment of ultimate empowerment, been so thoroughly buried beneath a narrative of surrender? What truth was so dangerous that it had to be forgotten? This was not a prayer for deliverance. It was a final lesson in liberation, a transmission of hidden knowledge meant only for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. The lines drawn that night were not random markings of despair. They were a sacred codex, a precise spiritual technology passed down through forgotten legacies and mystery schools that understood the architecture of reality. They were a guide to systematically breaking the energetic locks that keep humanity in a state of spiritual amnesia, a condition the ancient Gnostics called the dream of the archons. This forgotten legacy suggests that our world is governed by subtle forces that feed on our fear, our division, and our ignorance, creating an illusion that keeps the divine spark within each of us from remembering its own nature. The Master did not come to be a sacrifice for a flawed world. He came to awaken us from it. The system that followed, the empires built on faith, and the institutions that claimed to be the sole intermediaries to the divine, could not allow this truth to survive. A story of a suffering Savior whose grace is dispensed only through their authority is a perfect instrument of control, but a story of an empowering teacher who shows you how to save yourself is a declaration of war against that very control. And so, the story was changed. The Gospels that spoke of inner knowledge, of self-liberation, were hunted, branded as heresy, and burned. The memory of the master craftsman showing his apprentices the keys to their own freedom was replaced with the image of a lamb being led to the slaughter. The truth was not lost. It was buried. It was hidden away in the silence of forgotten manuscripts, and the whispers of traditions that refused to die, waiting for an age when humanity would be ready to look again. This journey we're about to embark on is not for the passive believer. It is for the seeker, for the soul who has always felt that something profound was missing from the official narrative. It is for the part of you that senses the invisible walls of the labyrinth and has begun to search for the door. The revelation of the 5 lines drawn in the dust of Gethsemane is more than a historical correction. It is an activation of an ancestral memory that sleeps within your own spirit. What we uncover here is not meant to simply be known, but to be experienced. It is a map left for you. If you feel the echo of this lost truth resonating in your core, if you are ready to explore the knowledge that has been hidden in plain sight, then your journey has brought you to the right place. Subscribe, and let us walk this path of awakening together. The greatest mysteries are not found in books of authority, but in the quiet courage to ask the forbidden questions. To understand the magnitude of what was hidden, we must first breathe the air of the world it was born into. Picture the dust of first-century Judea, not as a sterile page in a history book, but as a living, breathing crossroads of immense spiritual tension. This was not a tranquil land. It was a crucible, a place where the iron heel of the Roman Empire ground against the stone tablets of ancient law, and where the air itself was thick with prophecy and desperate hope. In the markets you could hear the clash of Greek philosophy against the rigid doctrines of the temple. In hidden courtyards, whispers of Egyptian mysteries and Persian lightbringers mingled with the local esoteric traditions. This was a spiritual ecosystem on the verge of either collapse or metamorphosis, a world gasping for a truth that felt alive, a truth that could not be taxed by Caesar or controlled by the high priests. Into this world walked a figure who was far more than a preacher of morality. The traditions that were later burned and buried remember him not as a gentle shepherd for a flock of sinners, but as a illuminator, a bringer of gnosis. Gnosis is not faith. Faith is belief in someone else's experience. Gnosis is direct, experiential knowledge of the divine, an awakening from within. It is the profound and shattering realization that the kingdom of heaven is not a place you go to after you die, but a state of unconsciousness you can access right now. This teaching was not a gentle reform. It was a spiritual earthquake. It suggested that the individual did not need an intermediary, a priest or a temple, to connect with the source, because the source was already inside them, sleeping. This was the most dangerous idea in a world built on the very concept of intermediaries. This is where the conflict begins, not on a battlefield with swords, but in the unseen realms of consciousness and control. Every system of power, whether it calls itself an empire or a religion, is built upon a single foundational premise, that you are incomplete and you need the system to be made whole. The Roman Empire offered order and identity in exchange for submission. The religious authorities offered salvation and divine favor in exchange for obedience. Both were architectures of control, built to manage the populace by controlling their relationship with power, be it worldly or divine. The revelation of Gnosis threatened this entire structure. If every person could awaken their own inner divinity, who would need an emperor? Who would need a high priest? What power is so great that its very existence must be denied? The presence of the Luminator was like a spark in a field of dry grass. The established order, the archontic paradigm, felt this threat instinctively. It recognized this ancient knowledge not as a message of hope, but as a declaration of war against the very illusion it worked so tirelessly to maintain. The whispers of self-liberation began to spread, and the system reacted as it always does, not with immediate violence, but with the more subtle weapons of misinterpretation, co-option, and containment. They began to watch him, to listen to his words, not for their wisdom, but to find the seams where they could be twisted, to find the parts that could be reshaped to serve their own narrative of control. The conflict was not yet open, but the battle for the soul of humanity had already been joined in the silent, calculating minds of those who held the reins of power. This wisdom he carried was not born in the vacuum of Galilee. It was the culmination of a legacy forgotten, a golden thread woven through the most ancient traditions of humanity. You can feel its echo in the Hermetic teachings from the sands of Egypt, which spoke of the mind as the creator of reality. You can see its light in the fire temples of Zoroaster, where the battle between light and darkness was understood as an internal, conscious struggle. It is present in the sacred geometry of the Pythagoreans, who knew that the universe was structured by divine principles that could be understood and navigated from within. He was not an inventor of a new path. He was a restorer of the oldest one, a master synthesist of a timeless, universal truth that had been fractured and hidden by ages of ignorance. This was the ancestral memory he came to reawaken. And so the great work of suppression began. It was a slow, methodical erasure, a masterpiece of spiritual sabotage. You do not destroy a powerful truth by attacking it head-on. That only creates martyrs and strengthens belief. Instead, you subtly change its meaning. You sand down the sharp edges of a revolutionary truth until it becomes a comforting platitude. The call to awaken your inner God becomes a command to worship an outer one. The tools for self-liberation are recast as rituals of dependency. The teacher who shows you the door out of the prison is reframed as a sacrifice meant to make the prison more comfortable. The system began to weave a new story, a story that would absorb his light, but contain it, redirect his power, and ultimately place the keys to his kingdom firmly back in the hands of the jailers. This growing conflict, this silent war between gnosis and dogma, is the essential backdrop to that final night in the garden. The air in Gethsemane was not just heavy with sorrow, it was charged with the culmination of this immense struggle. The master knew the system was closing in. He knew that his words would be twisted, his legacy reshaped into an instrument of the very consciousness he came to shatter. His final act, therefore, could not be just a prayer. It had to be a final transmission, a message encoded beyond the reach of words, a diagram of escape left for those who would come later, for those who would one day look back and feel that a crucial piece of the story was missing. How do you hide a key that unlocks every door, not by burying it, but by convincing everyone it is merely a stone? The lines he drew in the dust that night were the beginning of the answer. Where does one search for a truth that has been systematically erased? You do not look in the libraries of the victors, nor in the chronicles of the empires that built their thrones upon its absence. You look in the silence between the official words. You look for the gaps in the story, the spaces where a living, breathing wisdom was cut out, leaving behind a scar. The first and most profound proof of this hidden knowledge is not in what was written, but in what was declared forbidden. Imagine the cold stone halls of the 4th century, where men in robes gathered not to seek truth, but to define it, to build a fortress of dogma around a single, approved narrative. At councils like Nicaea, a vibrant ecosystem of spiritual understanding was reduced to a rigid creed. Gospels that spoke of inner light, of self-liberation, of gnosis, were branded as heresy. The very word heresy in its original Greek root simply means to choose. The crime was not believing a lie. The crime was choosing one's own path to the divine, a path that did not require a toll collector at the gate. How does one prove the existence of a river that was forced underground? You follow the whispers that haunt the edges of the desert. Before these truths were ever committed to brittle papyrus, they were an oral tradition, a living transmission, passed from master to a circle of trusted initiates. Picture a fire under a canopy of stars, far from the ears of the temple guards and Roman informants. Here, the deeper teachings were spoken, not preached. They were teachings on the nature of reality, on the forces that veil human perception, and on the sacred mechanics of awakening. This was a knowledge too potent, too transformative, to be cast like pearls before those who would trample it. It was preserved in the memory of men and women who became living libraries, carrying the codes of liberation within their own consciousness. This ancestral memory survived not on ink, but on the sacred breath of those who kept the flame alive in an age of encroaching darkness. Eventually, these whispers found their way onto scrolls. Texts like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Truth were not narratives of a man's life, but manuals for the soul's liberation. The Gospel of Thomas, for instance, does not tell a story. It is a collection of sayings, each one a key designed to unlock a door within the mind of the reader. It famously states, "The kingdom of God is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father." This is the language of Gnosis, the core of the revelation. It is a direct contradiction to a system that places the kingdom in a distant heaven, accessible only after death and only through the intercession of an established authority. These Gospels were a clear and present danger to that system, and so they were hunted, condemned, and burned, vanishing from history for over 1600 years. Then, in 1945, the desert decided to speak again. Near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, a local farmer, digging for fertilizer, struck a large clay jar with his spade. Inside was a treasure that would rewrite spiritual history, a library of 13 leather-bound codices containing over 52 texts that the world of dogma thought it had successfully destroyed. Here were the lost Gospels, the secret teachings, the chronicles of the Gnostics, preserved by the dry sand and the silence of centuries. It was an impossible discovery, a time capsule from a forgotten branch of human spirituality. What if the greatest library was not the one that was celebrated, but the one that was buried? The Nag Hammadi library was the physical proof. It was the body of evidence that confirmed the whispers, proving that a powerful, empowering, and radically different understanding of the Master's message had not only existed, but thrived before it was violently suppressed. This recovered wisdom did not appear from nowhere. It was a tributary of a much older and wider river of knowledge. The Gnostic texts from Nag Hammadi resonate with the most profound teachings of other ancient traditions, forming a golden thread of universal truth. You can hear its echo in the Hermetic axiom from ancient Egypt, "As above, so below, as within, so without," which taught that the cosmos and the human being are reflections of one another, and that to know oneself is to know the universe. You can see its light in the Zoroastrian struggle between light and darkness, understood not as a cosmic battle between gods, but as the internal war between ignorance and enlightenment within every soul. The very concept of breaking energetic seals to ascend through spiritual planes is a core tenet of multiple mystery schools, from the Pythagorean rites to the Egyptian journey through the Duat. The Master was not inventing a new path, he was illuminating the one timeless path that had been obscured by the shadows of empire and religion. With the written records burned and the oral traditions driven into secrecy, this forgotten legacy had to find new ways to survive. It hid in plain sight. It concealed itself in the cryptic language of alchemy, where the quest to turn lead into gold was a metaphor for the soul's transmutation from a state of ignorance to one of enlightenment. It was carved into the very stones of the great cathedrals by guilds of masons who had inherited fragments of this sacred geometry. It survived in symbols, a language that speaks directly to the subconscious mind, bypassing the senses of dogma. The five-pointed star, the vesica piscis, the endless knot, all became vessels for a knowledge that could no longer be spoken aloud. The 5 lines, drawn in the dust, were the master key, the source code from which many of these later symbols drew their power. They were a diagram of liberation, so simple they could be remembered at a glance, yet so profound they contained the entire architecture of spiritual freedom. The proof is no longer buried in the sand, but echoes in these recovered words and hidden symbols. The only question that remains is, what exactly do the 5 lines mean? What ancient locks were they designed to open within you? This is where the ancient dust touches your modern skin. This is the moment the story ceases to be about a historical figure in a distant land and becomes a mirror reflecting your own inner world. For this forgotten legacy, this hidden knowledge of the 5 lines was not buried in the Egyptian desert to become a relic for scholars to debate. It was preserved against all odds so that it could find you right now, in this very moment of your journey. The rediscovery of these lost Gospels is not an accident of history. It is an act of cosmic timing. It is a sign that a critical mass of souls on this planet is finally ready to remember. What does it awaken within you to know that a map to your own liberation has been waiting for you all along? Look around at the world you inhabit. Feel the subtle, pervasive pressure of the modern archontic system. It is no longer a Roman legion or a council of robed priests. It is the endless scroll that captures your attention, the 24-hour news cycle that feeds on your fear, the algorithm that learns your desires only to sell them back to you. It is the culture that tells you that you are incomplete without the next purchase, the next promotion, the next external validation. The prison is no longer made of stone and iron. It is built from noise, distraction, and a manufactured sense of spiritual amnesia. It is a labyrinth designed to keep you looking outward for a salvation that can only ever be found within. This ancient Gnostic truth has never been more relevant, for the mechanisms of control have only grown more sophisticated, more invisible. This is why the story resonates so deeply within you. It is not something you are learning for the first time. It is something you are remembering. Have you ever felt it? That quiet, persistent sense that something is profoundly misaligned with the world as it is presented. A splinter in your mind, a feeling that you are living in a dream, one from which you are struggling to awaken. This feeling is not a sign of madness. It is the first stirring of your ancestral memory. It is the divine spark within you, the captive Christos consciousness, knocking on the walls of your perception, reminding you that you are more than this small, limited self the world has taught you to be. That ache for meaning, that longing for a deeper truth, is the homing signal of your own divinity, calling you back to yourself. This recovered knowledge offers a radical redefinition of your identity and purpose. The system whispers a story of your smallness, your unworthiness, of a fundamental flaw at the core of your being that requires an external savior. It tells you that you were born into debt, a sinner in need of grace, dispensed by an authority outside of yourself. This ancient knowledge sings a different song. It declares that you are not a fallen creature, but a divine being who has fallen into a state of forgetting. Your purpose is not to seek worthiness, but to remember your inherent divinity. You are not here to be saved, you are here to awaken. The 5 lines are not a prayer for someone else's intervention, they are the instructions for your own resurrection from the tomb of ignorance. But this knowledge demands more than passive belief. It demands courage. To truly grasp the meaning of the 5 lines is to accept a profound responsibility for your own consciousness. It is to declare your spiritual sovereignty in a world that profits from your dependence. It is to choose to see the walls of the prison, even when it is more comfortable to pretend they are not there. This is why the path of the Gnostic, the seeker of direct knowledge, has always been a narrow one, walked only by those who value truth above comfort. The revelation we are approaching is not a comforting platitude. It is a spiritual technology, a precise methodology for deconstructing the illusion, piece by piece. What would you do if you were handed the keys to your own reality? So let the world outside fall away for a moment. Let the noise recede, breathe. Feel the silence that exists behind the constant chatter of the mind and the world. It is in this silence that the transmission can be received. It is in this inner stillness that you can feel the frequency of this ancient truth. The 5 lines drawn in the dust were more than mere symbols. They were an energetic key, a vibrational pattern designed to resonate with the very structure of the soul and the cosmos. To understand them is to learn a sacred language that speaks not to the ear, but to the spirit. It is a rite of passage, an initiation into a deeper level of reality that has been waiting just beyond the veil of ordinary perception. We return now to the garden. Under the ancient olive trees, the air is thick, not with despair, but with sacred intention. See the Master, not as a victim, but as a silent warrior performing the ultimate ritual of liberation. He is not surrendering to the forces of the world. He is demonstrating how to transcend them. The lines he draws are not a plea. They are an incantation, an instruction manual left in the earth for all who would have the eyes to see it. Each line is a vibration, a specific frequency designed to shatter a specific energetic lock that holds the human spirit in bondage. The first line breaks the first and most fundamental seal, the one that holds the entire illusion in place. Are you ready to see it drawn? The time for whispers is over. The moment of revelation is upon us. See the hand, steady and deliberate, moving over the cool earth. There is no tremor of fear, only the focused energy of a master craftsman at his final and most important work. The first line is drawn, a straight, unwavering mark in the dust. It is a declaration, a severance. This line is the blade that cuts the very first thread of the great illusion. It is the key that unlocks the seal of ignorance, the foundational belief that this world of shadow and substance is the only reality. This first act of sacred geometry is a reminder of a truth whispered in the mystery schools of Egypt and Greece, that the physical world is a reflection, a dream of a higher, more luminous reality. To draw this line, even in the theater of the mind, is to declare that you will no longer mistake the shadow on the cave wall for the fire that casts it. It is the first step out of the slumber, the initial jarring recognition that the prison is not the world, but your perception of it. A second line is drawn parallel to the first. The space between them hums with a new potential. This second mark is aimed at the heart of the Archontic Empire, the very source of its power over the human soul. It is the key that shatters the seal of fear. Fear is the currency of control, the invisible chain that links every cage. Fear of death, fear of judgment, fear of scarcity, fear of the other. The systems of this world are built upon it, thrive upon it, and amplify it at every turn. But this line is an act of supreme spiritual rebellion. It is the conscious choice to transmute the vibration of fear into the frequency of love and awareness. It is the luminator demonstrating that the only thing to fear is the belief in fear itself. To walk this line is to reclaim the power you have given away to every imagined threat, to every shadow that the system has taught you to see in the dark. What would change inside you right now if you truly understood that perfect love casts out all fear? The third line appears, bisecting the first two, creating a nexus of power. This is the dissolution of the third and perhaps most insidious lock, the seal of division. Look at the world, then and now. It is a grand stage play of separation, nation against nation, religion against religion, brother against brother, us versus them. This is the Archon's master strategy. For a humanity that is fractured is a humanity that can be easily ruled. But this third line is a symbol of integration, unity. It is a reminder that the divine spark that animates you is the very same spark that animates the one you have been taught to call your enemy. It is the sacred geometry of the sentence, I and the Father are one, but expanded to its true universal meaning, we are all one. To internalize this truth is to become immune to the poisons of judgment and hatred. It is to see the face of the Creator not in a distant heaven, but in the eyes of every being you meet. Then a fourth line is drawn, intersecting the others, creating a more complex pattern, a lattice of light. This is the breaking of the Seal of Dogma. This is perhaps the most dangerous line of all to the established order. Dogma is the cage built from someone else's truth. It is the voice of external authority that says, "Believe this and you will be saved. Do not question. Do not seek for yourself. We hold the keys." This fourth line is a declaration of spiritual sovereignty. It is the activation of gnosis, the inner. Knowing that is your divine birthright. It states that you need no priest, no book, no institution to stand between you and the source, because the source is not outside of you. It is the very core of your being. This was the truth for which the Gnostics were hunted and their gospels burned. It is the truth that dismantles hierarchies and returns the keys of the kingdom to every single soul. To walk this fourth path is to trust the wisdom of your own heart above all other voices. Finally, the fifth line is drawn, completing the symbol. A pattern now rests in the dust, a pentagram of light, a star of man awakened. This final line is the most profound. It shatters the seal of amnesia, the great forgetting. The core wound of humanity is not sin, but a forgotten identity. We have forgotten that we are not small, mortal creatures, born to suffer and die. We are eternal sparks of the infinite Creator, temporarily clothed in flesh, experiencing a dream of separation. This fifth line is the act of remembering. It is the journey home. It is the prodigal son returning not to an angry father, but to the recognition of his own divine inheritance. This is the culmination of the entire work, the final awakening from the archontic dream. To draw this line is to reclaim your true name, to remember your cosmic origins, and to realize that you are not here to be saved, but to awaken to the Savior you have always been. This is the turning point. This is the revelation that changes everything. The story of a gentle victim begging for the cup to pass is a lie, a carefully constructed piece of spiritual propaganda. The true story is of a master of energy, a luminous warrior, leaving behind a coded weapon for his students, a technology for deconstructing the matrix of control. The very institutions that claimed his name took this map of liberation and inverted it, using it to reinforce the very seals he came to break. They taught us to see the world as a fallen place, illusion, to fear, a judging God, fear, to separate the saved from the damned, division, to obey their creeds without question, dogma, and ultimately to forget our own innate divinity, amnesia. The greatest act of spiritual sabotage in human history was not destroying this knowledge, but twisting it into its opposite. The 5 lines in the dust were a complete system for spiritual ascension hidden in plain sight. This was the lost science of the soul. The practical application of the kingdom of God is within you. This knowledge did not die. It was buried alive, waiting. It slept in the sands of Egypt. It echoed in the coded language of the alchemists, and it called to you from the gaps in the official story. This is the ancestral memory stirring within you now. You have not learned something new. You have simply remembered something you have always known, on a level deeper than bone, deeper than blood. The map has been revealed. The 5 keys have been shown to you. But knowing the shape of a key is not the same as turning it in the lock. The true ritual, the one the system fears above all else, is not in knowing the lines, but in what happens when you dare to draw them in the landscape of your own soul. The dust of Gethsemane has long since been scattered by the winds of 2 millennia. The lines drawn that night have vanished from the earth, erased by the trampling feet of history and the deliberate silence of empires. But the pattern, the sacred geometry of liberation, was never meant to be preserved in soil. It was an energetic key, a vibrational code imprinted not onto the ground, but into the very fabric of human consciousness, waiting for a time when we would be ready to receive it again. This was never a story about a historical event that ended 2,000 years ago. It has always been a living transmission, a mirror held up to your own soul, reflecting a truth that time cannot diminish and dogma cannot destroy. The map has been revealed. The 5 keys have been returned to you. The journey from the garden to this very moment has been a long and hidden one, but you have arrived. What you have received is not a new belief system to be adopted, but a diagnostic tool for your own awakening. The 5 lines form a sacred circuit, a complete technology for reclaiming your spiritual sovereignty. They teach you to see the world not as a solid, unchangeable reality, but as a dream from which you can awaken. They guide you to locate the frequency of fear within your own being and to consciously transmute it into the courage of awareness. They call you to dissolve the illusions of separation that have been programmed into you, to see the divine spark in the eyes of all others. They empower you to release the need for any external authority to define your truth, and to trust the unwavering voice of Gnosis that speaks from the core of your own being. And finally, they invite you into the ultimate act of resurrection, to remember who you truly are, e.g., timeless, infinite consciousness playing a temporary human role. This is the forgotten legacy, not of a savior who died for you, but of a illuminator who showed you how to live. This ancient knowledge now poses a question not to the historians or the theologians, but directly to you. Look at the architecture of your own life. Where is the seal of illusion strongest? Is it in the belief that your happiness depends on external circumstances? Where does the seal of fear dictate your choices, keeping you in a job, a relationship, or a mindset that suffocates your spirit? Where has the poison of the seal of division made you see an enemy where you could have seen a brother or sister? What dogmas, religious or secular, have you accepted without question, outsourcing the authority over your own soul? And most profoundly, in the quiet moments when the noise of the world fades, do you feel the ache of the seal of amnesia, the deep, soul-level forgetting of your own magnificent divine nature? This is no longer an academic exercise. This is the great work. This is the path of liberation made manifest in the laboratory of your own life. The greatest truth the system ever worked to hide was not a secret about a man who lived long ago. The secret it hid was about you. It built a world and a story designed to convince you that you were small, powerless, and born into a debt you could never repay on your own. It gave you saviors and institutions to mediate your connection to the divine, because a populace that looks outside for its power is a populace that can be controlled. The revelation of the 5 lines shatters this entire paradigm. It is a declaration that the kingdom of heaven is not a destination. It is your origin. The Master did not come to build a bridge to a distant God. He came to remind you that the bridge is, and always has been, your own awakened consciousness. You are not waiting for a second coming. You are the second coming, the awakening of the Christos, the divine light within yourself. This is where the journey of watching ends and the journey of living begins. This knowledge was preserved in the sand and silence for you, for this moment. It is a seed. Whether it grows into a tree of life within you is now your choice. The path has been illuminated, but you must be the one to walk it. The ancient memory has been stirred. It is up to you to fully awaken it. Of the 5 seals that bind the human spirit, which one do you feel calling for your attention most urgently right now? Share your reflection in the comments below, not as a confession, but as a declaration of your intent to begin the work. If this revelation has resonated in the deepest parts of your being, if you feel the call to reclaim your forgotten legacy, then your journey with us is just beginning. Subscribe to this channel and become part of a community of seekers who are choosing truth over comfort and gnosis over belief. Share this message with another soul you know is searching For the light of this hidden knowledge grows brightest when it is shared. The ultimate lesson left in the dust of that ancient garden is a timeless one. You did not come to this life to be a passive believer in someone else's story. You came here to become the conscious creator of your own. You are not here to be saved. You are here to remember that you are already free.